Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased today to have Melanie Gibson on the show. She is a writer and author of the book Kicking and Screaming, a memoir of madness and martial arts. Thanks so much for being a guest on the show.
Thanks for having me, Laura. I'm happy to be here.
So, what a title. I look forward to hearing more about it. Definitely a fan of martial arts, and that's part of what intrigued me. And especially as women, there's not as many women that study martial arts, and I think it's so beneficial or can be very beneficial. So, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your story as it relates to martial arts, and how you got to writing this book.
Okay, well, it's quite a story, but I'll try to be concise. So I got back into Taekwondo, which was something I had done as a child, as an adult, to deal with struggles with mental health. I had struggled with mental illness probably my entire life, but I never really sought treatment until my early 30s. So around age 31, I started seeing a therapist, got on medication, and that was great. But I was missing something. I was still making really bad choices, especially in relationships. So I was, chasing that love that I couldn't give myself. I was having volatile temper tantrums and just all around feeling pretty unhappy. And I got to a point where I thought, I am tired of feeling this way. I need to do something that's a shock to my system, that's different, that's positive, it's wholesome. And it was funny because at one point I told my mom, if things don't work out with this guy that I was seeing, I'm going to do Taekwondo again. And I had done Taekwondo out in my rural West Texas hometown from the age of 10 until about 12. And I liked it. We stopped doing it just because, life got in the way. But it always been in the back of my mind. This was something interesting. It's different. It's cool. Let's do that. So fast forward to when I'm 33 and just a hot mess. And so I start researching schools, and I discovered that the Grandmaster, who was over my instructors in Snyder, so they reported up to him, and they test for their black belt students with him, operated his school in Fort Worth, about 5 miles from my home. And I remembered him from my childhood tests and tournaments. He'd come and he'd just kind of sit there and glare at us and intimidate
Right.
us. Old school Korean grandmaster, came up of age during the World War II and the Korean War, and learned Taekwondo in Korea and taught the US military, and came over here. So he operated his school. And I thought, okay, I'm not looking anywhere else. This is where I'm going. So I started over with him. I started over as a white belt. This was around 2013, and it felt like a fresh start in many ways. It was a fresh start with Taekwondo, and it was like hitting a reset button with my mental health. It got me out of the house. It got me out of my own head, which was really the best part. It gave me a community. It gave me goals. So it changed who I am on the inside and out.
I think that's incredible. And I really do feel that there's two elements to martial arts which can be really helpful for a lot of people. One is it gives you a way to kind of focus and can distract you from some of the things that are frequently causing us mental stress. And the other thing is it really helps us feel our own power. And I think
Mm-hmm.
especially as women, that's really important, that we literally feel the power of our own bodies and don't feel disempowered and weak. And I briefly studied Kuntao Silat, which is an Indonesian martial arts, and also a little bit of Muay Thai, kickboxing. And it was so helpful, even though I didn't do it for a long time. I'd like to, start another martial arts practice, but it helped me to feel like I was powerful. And I remember my trainer saying, and teacher, he was like, Laura, you could easily break a man's jaw. And I was like, okay, that's good. That's just good to know. Like, I don't know, this isn't something that we regularly would experience or have some concept of. So especially as women, we're taught to be fearful and afraid. And I think there's such an importance in knowing what we're capable of, and that we are capable of some of these things. That really helped me with my, I guess, even stress just in kind of daily life. Like if something were to happen, obviously prefer not to have to fight, but if anything were to come up, just to feel like there would be something that I could do, and I'm not just this, helpless little woman over here. So I don't know. I'm curious if you're able to put into kind of conscious thought, like what was it about martial arts that really helped you so much?
There were a lot of things that helped me. I think it has a great mind body connection. That was something I think I'd even noticed as a child. And it had stayed with me. I did dance in college. I started doing yoga when I was 18. And I always had that strong mind body connection. That's something I like about martial arts. And like you mentioned, the focus and the precision is it's rarely matched by anything else. I think the only other thing that keeps me entirely focused is painting a room in my house, because you have to be so detailed and precise. And I've told other people that when you're in a sparring match, that is the most focused and present I've ever been, because when someone's trying to kick you in the head, you cannot think about anything else.
Yeah, you
You
can't, you
have
have
to
to be in the
stay
moment.
absolutely in the moment. But even in those quiet moments where you're not doing any fighting, where you're working on technique, it again, that just that singular focus and all those little positive reinforcements that you get. You do a move correctly, you advance to another belt. You break a board, you win a sparring match, or you go to a competition, or it's even just infectious to watch other people meet their achievements too. I got to a point after I was a black belt where I'd get more excited about other students testing than I was about my own stuff. So you get that sense of community as well. I had a conversation recently with the person I'm training with now, and she said that she noticed that the martial arts schools who survived the pandemic had that strong sense of community. And she said that's really why a lot of people stay in martial arts. It's kind of funny to meet the people who say, well, I got into it because I wanted to learn self-defense or I wanted to learn fighting. So many other people get into it for other reasons, or they stay in it for those other reasons. I got into it for my mental health. Yeah, the self-defense and the physical part is really great, but I stayed for all those other things. You have emotional clarity, you have perseverance, self-reliance, confidence, all of those things that I wouldn't trade for anything else.
I think so much of this kind of practice, as well as meditation, working out, I think what a lot of people don't understand is it's not when you're just doing the thing that is the benefit. It basically retrains your brain and your body so that you're in a better state mentally and physically, like the rest of the time. So like when you're
Mhm.
meditating, like, yeah, it's great when you're meditating, but it's the rest of the time that you have less stress and everything, that the impact is so profound. So I feel it's the same with martial arts. Like you're investing not just in the time in those, that hour or two or a few or whatever it is that you're doing the martial arts. It's like, it's for the whole time that it's helpful.
Yeah, that's very true. And that calm mindset stays with you. And also, it gives you something to look forward to. I have a corporate day job, and I would have those moments where I'm sitting in a meeting. This was before everybody started saying pivot every other word in a meeting, but it was things like that. These corporate meetings, and I would think, in about an hour, I'm going to go scrub off all my makeup, put on loose clothing, and go fight a teenager. And that's going to be awesome. It's going to be so much fun. And it just takes you out of your day and puts you in this different world. So you get that escape while you're in Taekwondo or any martial art, but it, like you said, it stays with you. So that high from training or the fun that you had can go with you throughout your day. If you're stuck in traffic or you're at the grocery store and there's a long line, it just makes things lighter and more fun.
I think it's important to do that, whether it's martial arts or anything that is kind of mentally challenging, physically challenging, and stimulating. So just yesterday, I actually took my first class in something called the Wheel of Death. So that is a circus contraption that you see, for example, in performances with like Cirque du Soleil or some of these bigger circuses. And it's two wheels that are metal, and you think of almost like a hamster wheel, but like moving in the air surrounding each other. So they spin. And in order to stay upright, you basically walk and have to stay upright. And then you can do tricks and stuff with it. But it was amazing how I went in, and I have a lot going on in my business right now in my life. I just, got a place here in another city and just launching programs. And then I just had this kind of exhilarating feeling where I was just so in my body. Because just like what you talked about with martial arts, you literally will fall on your face if you're not like so in that moment. You will
Mm-hmm.
fall on your face on a metal contraption. And so afterwards, I was so exhilarated. So I feel like whatever that is, whether it's martial arts or some circus equipment or whatever that is, I mean, obviously do it in a safe way and make sure you have good teachers and safety equipment and all that. But it was so exhilarating and refreshing. And I felt like it was like a reset. So I think I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of like, it just kind of clears all this stuff away, all the kind of mental noise. And then you can face everything kind of fresh without all that stuff with you moving forward.
Mhm. The Wheel of Death sounds terrifying.
Now here, it sounds really scary. And some of the, the actual stuff for they do incredible things. Like they go on the outside of it and jump in the air and do, like a flip. And, so I was just walking. So to be clear, my first lesson involved walking forwards and walking backwards. But basically, when you step on it, it makes the whole thing move forward. Or if you walk backwards, it makes the whole contraption move back. But yeah, check it out. I'll probably do a social media post about it shortly, but yeah, it's super fun. But whatever that is, whether it's martial arts or something like this, but when you feel strong in your body and you have to just be so present, it helps you. And once you do that, you're better able to do it, not just in that moment, but I think later. So it's a wonderful skill set, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. And then on top of that, with martial arts, like I said, there's lots of practical applications, like being able to defend yourself should you need to. So how long have you been practicing now that you've gone, kind of back to it since you were a child?
Now that I'm back, it's been about 7 years. That was 2013. And I will say this is an interesting time because am getting over a knee injury. I tore my ACL in July of 2020 because, what else is going to happen in 2020? Of course, I tore my ACL and I had surgery. So I'm recovering. So I'm actually not training right now. I am able to do some things at home. So talk about a reset button. So I think that'll be different going back into Taekwondo, and it'll be a different approach, and I'll be a different athlete. So I'm still counting this time. I'm still counting this as my eighth
Yeah.
year in Taekwondo because it's still with me. It's you talked about the meditation, or you're doing your circus activity, or you're walking. Is that it stays with you? The clarity, the mental mindset, and the discipline and the positivity that I've gotten from Taekwondo, it was honestly worth the physical pain that I've gone through. The physical pain I've gone through is not as bad as the mental illness hell that I was in before I got back into Taekwondo. So it does stay with you, and it gives you this power even when you're not physically doing it. Even when I've been on the floor physically incapable of even walking, Taekwondo has stayed with me.
I think that's incredible. And yeah, if you're still practicing in some form or another, I think that still counts. And I totally understand. I partially tore my MCL when I was ice skating, and it's a long recovery. So
Hmm.
thankfully I did recover, and mine was only partially torn, so I didn't get the surgery. But yeah, it's interesting with this past year because I feel like it was like a reset, and so much of this was about healing and shifting and creating space. I'm curious, when you injured your knee, did you then write more? Like, was that a part of your journey, was to write this book?
Some of it was actually, I'd actually written the book a couple of years ago. So the book takes place from about 2013, around the time I started Taekwondo, to when I got my first degree black belt. And so by the time last year, I was already well into the book deal. But it was like a reset button because I had been moving too fast. I think I'm not really thrilled that I tore my ACL and had a painful surgery and have to go through painful rehab. But I am glad that something slowed me down because there was the pandemic going on, so there was all that weirdness. I was still working, which is a blessing. It was nice to have a job, but that didn't slow down. I was still doing Taekwondo. Things were ramping up for the books. We were in the editing process and working through the publication process. And I think something just had to say, okay, I'm going to literally put you flat on your back for a while. And it was nice to slow down. Not a pleasant way to do it, but it was nice to slow down. So I don't know if I necessarily wrote more, but I thought a lot more, and I was more introspective, and I started thinking about my priorities in life. I'm still a recovering perfectionist, so I think sometimes we have that tendency to want to do all the things. Like I'll say yes to all the things and I'll go out and do all these things. I even had in my head that I was going to write a couple more books while this was when I was naively getting into the publication process and not realizing how much the work that was. So with the knee injury, it forced me to just stop, slow down, enjoy my time at home as I recovered, and focus on the few things that were really important. You know, doing my day job so I can keep a roof over my head, and working on the book, and just paying attention to the people in my life, and those few things that were really important to me.
Yeah, I think we get these resets or opportunities to refocus at various points in our life. And I would say for a lot of people that COVID and, the whole everything that happened as a result of that was a big reset in so many ways. So, it's funny because you're releasing this book, and I actually also released a book during this time that is a book I had been kind of working on for years. So it was like, well, this is a good a time as any, because I normally travel a lot and that just wasn't possible to do. So that's really wonderful. So I would love if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your mental health journey and what some of your mental health struggles were. I think it's always helpful to hear for those who have dealt with mental health issues, that they're not alone, and what people have dealt with.
That's true. Thank you for asking that. And no, people aren't alone. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book Kicking and Screaming, because I thought I had a story to tell. And I thought I was living a common story, but you didn't often hear it. So I've read a lot of memoirs. That's my favorite genre. But it seemed like the mental health memoirs I read were always the extreme situation: a suicide attempt, a hospital stay, in and out of hospitals from a very young age, losing their job, not being able to keep a job, families falling apart, financial ruin. And those are terrible things. And I don't want to discount what people go through, because that is a terrible thing. The mental health care in this country is not very great. So that's a whole other issue that needs to be
Yeah.
addressed. But I wasn't one of those people. I've suffered from it my entire life, but those things just didn't happen. And there were a lot of people like us hiding in plain sight. One of the latest studies show that 1 in 5 adults in the United States has a mental illness. Well, we're not all in mental hospitals. We're not all attempting suicide. We're just living our lives. We have families, we have jobs, we have hobbies, we have interests. We're
Yeah.
here. But unfortunately, because of that stigma, it's hard to talk about it. It's hard to admit it in our workplace or even to our families and friends. And so this is even kind of as I'm out here talking about this book, I'm having to come into my own of talking about it publicly and saying, hey, I have mental illness, and that's not a bad thing. It's okay. A lot of us do. Let's talk about it. So a little bit about my history. I'd always had kind of a dark sensibility about me as a child. I was very sensitive. I'd get angry quickly. I was lonely. I really didn't like other people very much, so that didn't help my case in being lonely. Very volatile emotions. And I didn't know how to explain how I felt. I'd get sad for seemingly no reason, or anxious, incredibly anxious and depressed. And as I got older as a teenager, began to see disordered eating and body image problems. So you add that on top of the mental health part of it. And in my 20s in college, that's when suicidal thoughts started to come in. So I have had a lot of suicidal thoughts, never an attempt, but it's certainly been there. And that's a terrible way to feel, is that you don't really want to die, but you don't really want to live either. It's like being in this limbo of just hating your situation and being in so much pain, but you're also too scared to take that next step. So you're just stuck. And I just soldiered through. Didn't tell anyone. I don't recommend doing that, but I just soldiered through. Thought, well, I've got to go to school. I've got to get a job, because that's what you do. And it came out. I mean, I did fine with school and work, so I'd hide behind those accomplishments. Like I said, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and that's one of the ways to cope with it is seeking that perfectionism. But I was just a terrible at relationship skills. Couldn't hang on to friendships. I'm probably somebody's crazy ex-girlfriend. Somebody's probably told stories about me, and I probably deserve it. I was a mess. So I just couldn't cope with it anymore. And it's incredibly lonely to have depression, just that sinking feeling, or rapid mood cycling and anxiety, and not being able to know what it's doing to you, and know how to seek help. So finally, when I was about 31, I was feeling suicidal, and I just thought I had enough wherewithal to think, okay, this isn't good. I can't do this anymore. So I called the helpline that I had through my employer, got in touch with a therapist, and that was really great. She was a wonderful, sweet woman who really helped me dig into some things. But the suicidal thoughts didn't go away. And so she referred me to a psychiatrist who got me on medication. And I know sometimes psychiatric medication can be very controversial. Psychiatry has not had a great history as far as how they treat people. It's gotten a lot better. And some of that has been medication, but it works for me. So it works for me personally. I'm not right, you have to work that out with your doctor, but that's one of the things that did happen to work for me personally. Had some side effects at the beginning, but I think I'm one of the lucky ones who didn't have to switch medications a lot. It just worked. So that's where I got to the point where I was doing okay, but I still really wasn't doing the work that you need to do. You know what I mean by doing the work? It's
Sure. Yeah,
building self-awareness. Yeah, that personal work is building self-awareness, taking responsibility for your actions and your choices. There are some things that I can attribute to my anxiety or depression, but not everything. There are some things I choose to do that make my life worse or make somebody else's life worse. So I just had to start taking responsibility and saying, okay, I've got people in place to help me with the chemical part of my brain and the mental illness, but some of these thoughts and behaviors are my responsibility. And that's what drove me into taekwondo. And that's still the journey that I'm on now. I was 33 when I started. I'll be 42 later this year. So I'm a lot further on the journey, but still a work in progress, just like everyone else.
No, we love that. Well, thank you so much for talking honestly about this. I think we really do need to remove the stigma against mental health and looking at it from a health perspective. Like, we're not like shaming people if they have a heart problem or a liver problem or whatever. We're not like, you can't talk about that. That's embarrassing. Like, things happen, or if they have diabetes, just as an example. And I really feel too, the interesting thing, and I feel like this is still being there's still a lot of research to do, and it's still being learned about, and we're expanding our awarenesses, but there is a strong connection between our mental health and our physical health. And so from that perspective, it especially shouldn't be shamed if there is a biological component to this. It's something that we all need to learn more about. So I think that's important to address. And I think we're also on a society level continue to expand our understanding of what we have labeled as mental illness. From a psychic, it's interesting because a lot of people that I see that are labeled as having mental health issues are quite psychic, and they just don't have the tools to manage it. So I think there's more shifting in that area, and I'm very grateful for that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that mental illness isn't a real thing, but there's so many different ways to approach and look at a problem or an issue. And I think some approaches work for some people and other approaches work for different people. So I'm glad you've talked about your journey and what has worked for you. I encourage everyone who has struggles in this area to try different approaches, follow your intuition, and see what works for you. And don't give up until you find something, because there is something that will help you. You just have to figure it out what it is for yourself. I mean, varying health issues that I've had, it's taken me a long time. And I was diagnosed as depressed when I was around 30. And I actually know I was depressed when I was an adolescent, but it's certainly, I just never went to the doctor. So it was never diagnosed. But I knew that a part of that was for me some health issues. And once I got some of those health issues and also left my unhealthy relationship, I felt a lot better. So it's like a multiple facets to this. So I'm glad you're talking about this in the different areas and approaches that have helped you. So if people are interested in pursuing martial arts for themselves, do you have any pieces of wisdom? I feel like that can be kind of an intimidating thing, especially if you weren't introduced to it as a child. Like, how do you do that? How do you learn about this? How do you find a place to go?
That's a good question. And it's interesting to see how people are starting to come out of this pandemic and seek out things to do like martial arts. I went to visit my school the other day, and she said business is booming. And I was a little surprised. I work in healthcare, so we take the pandemic very seriously, and I've also been injured, so I've been kind of isolated in my home. But I was surprised and pleased to hear that people are getting interested, and it's mostly kids, but adults too. So for adults, maybe just start doing some research, not being too serious about it, but just kind of seeing what looks fun. What are you interested in? Is it striking? So you have a lot of different directions you could go in that. You'd mentioned you've done Muay Thai. That looks like a lot of fun to me. I love
It is a
knees and elbows.
fun,
That looks fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is becoming very popular, or different types of wrestling. That's becoming interesting. There's some martial arts with weapons. I think Kali is that the Filipino martial art with weapons. And just looking at videos, even watching movies and saying what looks fun. So you have that part of it, and then also seeing what's available in your area. Now, that people have found out they can successfully do martial arts classes online with Zoom. Kind of. You still need that in-person feedback, but that may also be a way to get started. So if you live in a rural area, or you live in an area where maybe there isn't a martial arts school, that may be a way to get started. So that way you're not having to pay to go out of town. So just look online and look what seems like fun, and think about what works for you with your job, if you have a job or school or family life, your other obligations, what works with your finances. So I really don't have one set recommendation. I would just think, make sure it's fun, because we get to our point in our lives as adults, we have to do a lot of adulting. We have to do a lot of things that just have to get done to pay the bills and keep the roof over our head. So you might as well use the free time that you have doing something fun. And that's why I've still done taekwondo, is that it hasn't stopped being fun.
I love that. I think that's a great piece of advice for a lot of different things, not just researching martial arts. And also, I think the community fit, the teacher fit are really important with whatever you're doing. Does it feel like you feel welcome when you go? Do you feel like you like the teacher's approach? And I encourage everyone to just explore and, try different, a lot of places have drop-in classes, or you can go and like check things out, like do things as you can. And yeah, that's one thing I will say that I feel like is a positive benefit of COVID, is there's a lot more opportunities online than there ever have been. And that means you can connect with teachers and content that you've never been able to before from wherever you are. So I think that's really incredible. Well, this has been so much fun, Melanie. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I'd love to just see if there's anything else you'd like to share before we finish our interview today.
Oh, thanks for talking. I love to talk shop and talk martial arts. So I just wanted to touch on the mental health part a little bit. Is that watch your perfectionism. It can be a really dangerous thing, especially when it pays well. So maybe not just in finances, but in other rewards, like a body or relationship or things like that. That's a lesson that I've had to learn really recently over the last year. So just keep doing keep doing the work, whatever the work is for you. Find that positive thing that helps you keep evolving and changing and growing. So I just also wanted to mention the book that I have that's out, that's called Kicking and Screaming, a memoir of madness in martial arts. And it goes into my story of my mental health journey and training from a white belt to a taekwondo black belt. And there's a lot of humor in there too. So mental health can be a dark, lonely place. It's not fun. We have a lot of tears, a lot of anger, but you can find some laughter in it too. So I hope I can make some people laugh with my book as well.
Oh, I think that's really, really wonderful. And it's an important thing with mental health that we all get the support, whatever that is for us. Like it could be, following a traditional path, getting support one way or the other, and reading books, I think, to find out what has worked for other people is powerful. And the perfectionism aspect, I think, is important to mention. I have a woman who was a friend and client, and she was a counselor, and I have really struggled with perfectionism over the years in a lot of areas. And she's like, Laura, that's a trauma response. And I was like, oh, I never really thought about that, but it's a way for us to cope and kind of manage things. And once I understood that, it really helped me with that. I mean, I'm not to say that I still don't have those tendencies. That's maybe a longer term process to clear, but it's helped me to not get caught up in it so much. So any particular tactics or strategies that have helped you with dealing with the perfectionism in particular?
I've got two things. One is something I've done for almost 10 years, and that's journaling. My therapist begged and begged me for 2 years to do it. And finally, she had this little diary that had Gumby and Pokey on it, said, here, do something with this. And so I started writing, and that helped me develop a lot of self-awareness. It helped me notice patterns, helped me break some habits. So journaling is a great way to look at your situation objectively. And a second thing is something that just happened to me very recently. So I mentioned earlier that I had knee surgery, and I just started going back to yoga classes at my gym. So
Mm.
I've done yoga since I was 18, about 25 years. And you think you've learned all you can learn, but you don't. Yoga keeps giving. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So I was in maybe my second class since I've started going back. And I started, like I do, as somebody with anxiety, to kind of mull over something I was worried about with work. Turns out I didn't even have to worry about it, but that's how my brain works. I just started to noodle and kind of chew away at it. And this voice inside me said, you don't have to solve it here. And I thought, wow, okay, no, I don't. So I just got right back into my pose, and my brain tried to work at me again when I was driving or when I was in physical therapy or even logging onto my computer at work. And I just said, no, you don't have to solve it here, because very often we get stuck in the past or we're worried about the future. And that thing we're worried about in the future usually isn't going to happen, or it's not going to happen in that horrible way that you
Right.
think it will with that catastrophic thinking. So I've kept that as my mantra. And it's kept me from having those destructive daydreams of worrying about conflicts that usually aren't going to happen, or worrying about something that's not going to be so bad. So those two things, writing to gain some objectivity, and then whatever you're worrying about, just find a way to be in the present, because you're not going to solve that problem right now anyway. So just let it go and focus on what's right in front of you.
Oh, that's amazing. Really good advice. Thank you so much for connecting with us. If people want to learn more or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So they can go to my website. I have a blog called littleblackbelt.com. Little play on the term little black dress, because a little black belt is a really great accessory. So littleblackbelt.com, and then I am on social media as at Melanie Gibson author.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melanie, for talking with us today.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you'd like more information, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me at Twitter at that Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44. I'm going to go ahead and post a photo of the Wheel of Death if you're curious about that. And you can also find me at Facebook at Healing Powers. Thanks for listening, and many blessings.